Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second talk on the final day of VCF 2024. I'd like to introduce everyone to Byron Stout here, who's Director of Engineering at iSIMS. Byron, as he put it in his mini bio, was one of those lucky kids that got a Commodore 64 on Christmas morning in 1983 and has spent every day thinking about programming ever since. And he's going to talk to us about from VAX to DOS to Win to Web. And on a few points at the end, if you have questions, just give me a chance to get the microphone to you. Okay, great. Thanks, Byron. Over to you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Glad you're here. You know there's an Atari Classroom. If you want to go, there's still time. No, I'm kidding. I'm glad you're here. All right, so this is a little bit history, a little bit nostalgia, and I think it really hits, I think that the years that I was a growing engineer, there's a lot of GUI changes, a lot of changes in user interfaces and how we feel about them. So I feel like this is kind of going to be a little fun for both of us, I hope. So yeah, that's not me in the picture, but it did happen like that in 1983 when I got my first Commodore 64. And I grew up in this little place called Hilton, Oklahoma, right in the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma, kind of halfway between Oklahoma City and Dallas. We had a very, very, very small community. So yeah, I've had a chance to work for a lot of interesting companies. And I like to show this list because I think the way American football, and you look at coaching trees and you say, this guy's style is like this because of who he coached with. Well, so these are the programming languages that I learned either for free or some programming languages that I was actually paid to use. So seeing that list gives you a feeling maybe for some of the things that you might have done as well. So I like to think about, we're time travelers. We're all here together now, but we started in different times, different places, but we've all come together. And this is kind of important because if you've seen these names of generational cohorts, this means that based on the years you were born, you experienced certain things in society, certain things in politics, certain things in technology that shaped your worldview. Some people say that the music you listened to when you were 13, the music that you liked and was popular when you were 13 is what you will like for the rest of your life. I guess, I don't know. But this is very similar. So the technology that you used to, you've depending on when you were born, this is for real how you feel about things. So, the theme of the show. There were the before times. The before times when everything was text-based, everything was delivered through terminals or other interfaces. And then, of course, we talk about the theme of the show, which is the rise of the graphical user interface. How many of those can you recognize? Are there a few of them you recognize? All of them, all right. Especially the very ugly one in the bottom right-hand corner, right? DOS, DOS Executive, or what was called Windows version 1. Oh, my goodness. Does anybody know why the Amiga one? The Amiga one is the blue one, right? Why did they choose the blue and orange? Did anybody hear that story? Apparently, they were trying to make it also work on TVs at some point in time, and apparently those contrasted very well, and that's why those terrible colors were chosen. All right, so I don't have my poll working, but I did want to kind of, talk about some of the potential early ones that you could have seen, right? Yeah, it's not going to work if I even try to reload that. You know what? I'm going to jump forward because I want to talk to you about the thing that was my first GUI experience. I don't know if this was one of yours as well, but Magic Desk 1, and there was no Magic Desk 2, by the way. Magic Desk 1 was it. And it used a joystick to use the hand. You could point it around at things. And did a file folder and very cool things. And there's something really interesting. It's mostly, it was called Magic Desk 1 Type and File because it had the file cabinet and it had this typewriter. And there's something really interesting about this typewriter. I do kind of want to demo this. I didn't get my demo ready, but it'll just take me a second here. The little caret there, right? You see the little caret at the bottom of the screen? And it's really meant to mimic how a typewriter used to work. This will feel very disconcerting as you look to how any word processing is done in the last 40 years, this will seem very weird to you how this actually behaves, but it's based upon what a typewriter did. Because the typewriter, the paper moved. The typewriter didn't move, the paper would move, and the typewriter only typed at one spot, which is the little spot there in the caret, right? So this feels really weird. So let me jump into this. I actually should have started this a bit earlier, but we'll be there. Because as I was preparing for this talk, I did this, and then all of a sudden I'm like, wow, that is really weird. And I think you'll feel it too. All right, I got an image here, so it will take us a little less time than having to wait about the 5 minutes that it used to take to load this from disk, you know. All right, so I've got a standard little emulator here, and I've got an image saved. Okay, yep, that's it right there. All right, so this is Magic Desk 1, and the typewriter that came with that. This runs on a Commodore 64. And as I move the cursor key up or down or left or right, or I type, the paper moves. So that seemed extremely normal back at the time, because that's what we were coming from, was typewriters where the paper moved. And but now, when you see this today, that just feels so awkward, doesn't it? All right. That's my only Commodore piece today, but let me get this started while I'm going forward. Okay, so let's talk about what was going on. What was going on? I talked about those cohorts and things that were shaping you. Let's talk about some of the things that were happening in between 83 and 87. The Strategic Defense Initiative, right? You remember that? The final episode of MASH, largest broadcast audience for a television show finale. Of course, what you see on the program guide, the famous commercial that Steve Jobs was not authorized to actually purchase the airtime from his board for the Big Brother Apple Macintosh launch. Of course, New Coke. So those are the things that were happening in those 4 years. What was happening with me? Oh, wait, before that, let's talk about what was happening in PC operating systems. DOS. DOS was still a primary driver. A lot of DOS was very used in a lot of different situations. Lisa, that was 83, right? And then the Mac was quickly on the heels of that. GEOS for Commodore 64. At one point, everyone was using GEOS that used a Commodore. So like 90% of all Commodore owners were using GEOS. And then like those terrible versions of Microsoft Windows, version 1 and version 2 came out in 85 and 87. All right, so that was happening in our PC operating systems. And now, what was happening with me? Yeah, that was me. I was in high school. That was the entire graduating class for my high school in 87. And 83, all I had really was a 64 and a cassette drive. That was all that was really going on. Does anybody recognize that box? The SRA Reading Laboratory? Once again, depends on your age and where you were. This is a very familiar box. And this actually this strange box has a lot of influence for what I did in high school. Because I used to love this. It was a self-paced reading laboratory, so I could read way ahead of having to wait for my other classmates. It was great. But I got to become friends with the teacher that ran the reading laboratory and kind of had access to some other computers. So besides the Commodore 64 I had, the school had 2 TI-99s, and I got to have access to those, which was kind of cool. And I did get to see an Apple II, which was in the library, and we worked a little bit on some TRS-80s. And then as a senior, the school bought some Tandy 1000s, and no one knew how to use them, but I guess I had this reputation, so I got to play with a few computers, so it was kind of cool in those high school years. But of course, we're still talking pre-GUI, right? So you had to be able to type commands. You had to be able to do text commands to make the computer do anything. So like to load a directory, you had to be able to know that, right? Everybody who's a Commodore person probably has muscle memory to know how to type that. Load, star, comma 8, and list to see it. And then, does anybody know what that command does for a Commodore? That's formats a disk. Oh, man. So, like I said, I had a cassette. And then when I got a disk a couple years later, I was so excited. I have a disk drive. And I'm like, how would I use it? And like, you had to like figure out how to like find in the manual to type this like long set of stuff to be able to format a disk. So yeah, not easy, not friendly. So I did a lot of programming there. This is a program I wrote called Thief. I guess at some point I must have saw that there's a way that you could use greater than and less than symbols to indicate that that was a key someone's supposed to hit. And anyway, so this was the main screen, and I didn't put any hints on here. Apparently I chose R and L for the keys to like move the dial right and left to try to guess a combination. I didn't put anything on the screen. It would have been so easy. I don't know why I did. I guess that just wasn't the theme at the time, that we didn't really put helpful hints on the screens for people. They had to figure it out. Other things that I was doing at the time, I guess somewhere I figured out if you use reverse characters, that also meant keys you're supposed to use. I changed at some point, instead of using the greater than less than, I used parentheses. I don't know why I changed that. So these are like very common interface patterns that we were used to have to kind of like figure things out when using older computers. Does anybody recognize that game? It's right over. You know, you're my person.
Sorry, misspent.
It's right over Moscow. Of course, I acquired this game through a disk copy. It came with no instructions, and this was a very, very, very difficult screen to get out of. Without instructions, because there was a really unusual key here. You had to hit F7 at a certain point to be able to open the doors. Most people who received this game and tried to play this game without the instructions never got out of this room, because you could never figure out the proper timing and the proper key to use for that. But I think that helped make people who use these games and use these systems at the time really good at black box testing, because you didn't have friendly hints. You didn't have a nice GUI that would tell you or would be very intuitive. You had to kind of learn things and try things out. So I think that's maybe a side effect of people that had to go through the pain of not having actual instructions of stuff. All right, public domain software came about. This was something I think was very interesting. This is something that kind of changed me a lot. So Commodore needed more software. There was like this giant library of public domain software. They took all that public domain software, slapped some packaging on it, slapped a little friendly login screen on it or start screen on it, and they sold all this software that was previously in public domain. This is the screen. So every one of those programs, literally hundreds and hundreds of those programs, all had the same start screen. And every one of those had this something very similarly formatted welcome screen. They had instructions that was the same color, same style. Every one of those public domain software programs started to introduce a standard. And that standard started to influence me, at least. This is the game Lemonade, by the way. If you've played it a lot, that looks familiar to you. Anyway, so some programs I did after I started seeing this public domain software and seeing the way that those work, I started getting a little better about my white space, instructions, formatting for menu choices, things like that. I do want to point out this is a very interesting thing too. I chose the pound key, hit the pound key to continue instead of any of the other return space and I remember specifically why I chose the pound key, because if you have seen a Commodore 64 keyboard, there is a pound key. And I was thinking to myself, what is the least used key on this keyboard? What is the key that I don't use for anything? And it was the pound key, because I grew up in the US, sorry. So that's why I used the pound key to continue on that program. All right, what was happening in 87 to 91? Wow, the NES came out, big stock market crash, the Tiananmen Square protest, the guy with the grocery bags in front of the tanks, that was these were the things that were shaping us between 87 and 91. There were a lot of GUIs that were in this time. This is a remarkable number, and there's probably others I'm leaving out, really, but the main ones, MS-DOS, these were significant releases, version 4 and version 5. Huge improvements, things that happened in version 5 of MS-DOS. The Mac OS still rolling at this time. Version 5, 6, and 7. GEOS, which was already starting to capture such a huge market share, also came out with an Apple version. Came out with an IBM PC version of GEOS. It's pretty incredible. Of course, Amiga launches in that time frame. There's some great videos and some great material out there for what happened between Bill Gates and the IBM folks for this OS2 versus Microsoft Windows feud. Really good, really interesting story. You should watch that. But yeah, there were things going on there. So then, what was I doing between 87 and 91? I was in the Army. So I do remember having access to a few of these machines. I remember having access to in a library, and I had a friend that was doing some things with Amiga for video that was kind of cool. So, but I don't remember a whole lot. I wasn't really involved in doing a lot of programming during those years. But I did play a lot of Nintendo. I do remember that. But I didn't do a lot of programming. All right, so skip forward, 91 to 94. O.J. Simpson car chase. Yeah, we just saw that he passed recently. Grunge was a big music style. The Pentium processor was released. I remember when that happened. That was a huge release. Intel spent so much money on marketing for the Pentium processor. Beanie Babies. I don't know anybody. I don't have any Beanie Babies anymore. I feel like my sister at one time bought a bunch. Still a lot happening in operating systems. System 7 came out in 91, and then there's sort of a bit of a pause after that. As you know, the Apple almost didn't make it. V3 of the Amiga, big MS-DOS release, Microsoft Windows version 3.1. Now that's where everything really started to stay. Microsoft started to own the market in the PC Intel-based platforms there with version 3. And OS2 was still trying to fight a little bit, try to find some market space there with their version in 93. I was at school, so I used the Montgomery GI Bill to go to school at Southeastern Oklahoma State University. The claim to fame of Durant, Oklahoma is this big peanut statue. I don't know why. It's actually not even a model of an actual peanut. It's the Guinness Book of World Records entry says it's the largest statue of a peanut. I don't know how they got away with that. Anyway, I distinctly remember how I got involved in computer science because you had to go see the VA advisor because you couldn't enroll online, right? There's no internet, things like that. So you had to go see an advisor to enroll. And so the VA advisor, sets up all your paperwork and your classes and gets you approved for the GI Bill payments. He says you have to have a major. And I didn't know what I wanted to do at that time. Maybe I wanted to do accounting. He's like, all right, you need to decide now or you have to go to the back of the line. And I was like, all right, geez, there's a really long line. I'm not going to go back to the line. So I'm like, all right, computer science. So that's how computer science became my major because I didn't want to have to go wait in the line again to meet the advisor. So when I first arrived, this is what the giant computer lab looked like. All these VT320 terminals, table after table after table of these terminals. This really cool VAX cave, they called it. It's kind of like this glassed-in area that you could see all the VAXes that were behind there, and a printer that was like basically spewing green bar paper, seemed like 24/7. And had this one table on the very far end that had about 8 IBM computers there. So that meant that my classes, so the VAX, this is not my picture, by the way, but it looked pretty much exactly like that. This whole big wall of VAXes. So my first couple years of university, we were doing VAX. I felt this was a big step backwards because I felt like I had been doing things that were more interesting. I was used to being able to have a better screen editor. I was used to be able to go up and down the screen and choose my commands. And it was a real struggle for me to go back. I was used to be able to I had been using Turbo Pascal a little bit before that. So I was used to being able to not have to separately compile and link my code in multiple steps. So that was really kind of challenging. I would have a lot of more cool things to show you, but this disk betrayed me. I had all my work from university stored on this disk, and it's completely unreadable. And I don't know why. I archived so many things, and somehow I didn't archive this disk. And anyway, it's all lost, so I don't have a lot of code here. But I do want to talk about one of the professors who was not a VAX guy. He was a new young guy who just joined the school. And he had this library called box.pass, and it used IBM extended characters to draw boxes and do menus and things like that. And if you used the box.pass library in your projects, you got 10 extra points. So everybody used box.pass. So that was my first thing. So there's a lot of programs that look that way, right? So because of those drawing characters, a lot of DOS programs started to look like this. They were a little more pleasing, but it wasn't always obvious of what you had to do. It was still very kind of menu-driven, command-driven, but they're a little more pleasing, right? Things like this, like the Norton Control Center and X-Tree, right? Visually appealing. Boxes are starting to organize information, but each one has a little different settings for what you do and how you would act on the program. And then DOS 5, I talked about DOS 5. Wow, a couple things changed, right? Because you had MS-DOS 5 came with QBasic. That was a huge upgrade from GW Basic. And it came with this like really cool environment. Of course, there was the MS-DOS editor that also came out at that time, which was essentially the QBasic shell just for editing other files. And then, of course, in this period, we also used Turbo Pascal, which they all start to see there's some things that are very similar here, right? So I want to demo a couple of these real quick for you. All right, so I've got a DOS box here. I've got a Windows 3 image with DOS. Let's fire this up. And let's see if I can get the screen to actually scale out a little bit better for us. All right, here we are. And let me go see if that's any better. No, that's not much better at all, isn't it? So let's go to scale it. All right, I think it might be cutting off a little bit, but that's probably better for everybody. All right, so first I wanted to show, right there's that edit that I showed you. That was a huge thing. You used to use Edlin before that, and you had like, it was a line editor very similar to some other things that some people still use today. But it was a huge difference. Because that little black dot, that little black square in the corner is a mouse cursor. Let me capture my mouse here. And whoa, you could use a mouse in DOS, and this was huge. This was a huge game changer. And you could use that, and there were menus that were pulled down, and it was pretty incredible. Now I want to then show you quickly, QBasic looked pretty much the same, but I do want to do something in Turbo Pascal real quick here. All right, Turbo Pascal. It follows the same conventions. Here's the square that works as a mouse, and it's got all sorts of regular menus with hotkeys and things that you would expect to see in a regular GUI, right? It's even got interesting things like dialog boxes with controls. Now, this is DOS, but it's got like, you can tell these are radio buttons and check boxes and things like that. And this is a dialog box with a close icon. It's all very cool, right? That's just for fun. Let's do it real quick. This should only take me a second to, it's single quotes, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, all right, so let's do the awesomeness here where you could just do a run and it will run it immediately, and yeah, that's a little simple hello world using Turbo Pascal. But yeah, there's all these concepts that were starting to be introduced, and we weren't even talking about Windows yet, but things are starting to make more sense. People as users can understand menus, and if they can understand how to use these from program to program to program, it's not as confusing, and you had to start guessing it like you needed an F7 key in order to open the Bombay doors and things like that, right? All right, so all these things really add up to one specific thing. There's a backronym that actually explains these. Have you seen this word before? A TUI. It's a backronym because no one called them TUIs at the time, but after people started using GUI, people kind of said, hey, there were these text-based things that had the same aspects, that had the same feelings, had the same things, the same functionality. So yeah, TUI is kind of this whole classification of things that were like a GUI, had some of the same things, easy to use, and more intuitive, mouse-based, but were text-based. There's a library that shipped with Turbo Pascal, TurboVision. Has anyone seen this? TurboVision was this really complicated library, but it did some amazing things. It made all these things possible. Came with this manual, because when you bought Turbo Pascal, it was like this giant box, because it had all these books that came with it. So yeah, the TurboVision, I remember spending a summer trying to learn TurboVision. It's 640 pages is the size of this book. Monstrous. And the only thing I really remember, I remember being sort of successful that summer, but mostly I remember is closing parentheses. Because the way that the language worked and the way that the framework worked, you had to inject a lot of these objects into it. And all the objects, almost everything you did, if you had a form and you're putting checkboxes and list boxes, command buttons, they all had to be injected in there with code and like this, and you end up with a bunch of trailing right parentheses you would need. This is before IntelliSense as well. So you had to basically, compile syntax error, missing right parens. All right, let's go add one. Compile, syntax error, missing right parens, let's add another one. And you kept on going that until hopefully you got enough or something else was really broken. But that's all I remember is like just insane amounts of closing right parens. And then later that same summer, this happened. Does anybody know about this? Yeah, so this was actually, you would think this might be something that came out first. Was this the first Visual Basic? No, this was actually the second Visual Basic. The first Visual Basic came out for Windows. And then this version came out. There was one version that existed, and never ever again was there a Visual Basic for DOS or another DOS programming language from Microsoft. It was really meant to be a prototyping tool. Alan Cooper built it. And Microsoft said, hey, we need to do something. We're trying to get rid of Quick Basic. So there were like these parallel projects that were running. And Visual Basic for Windows got out the door first. Visual Basic for DOS came second. But this is really interesting stuff. So I want to show you something real quick in Visual Basic for DOS. Let's see, got to scale this guy out again. Okay. All right, so not only is it inside one of these TUI environments, and it's got, the mouse cursor that you can move around and, the same menu things that you're used to, but it had a form builder in it, which Turbo Pascal, the TurboVision library, as a form, you had to kind of define your forms. You almost had to do this on paper first before you went over. So I'm going to create a new form here. And for this new form, let's see, let's overwrite that. All right, there's a tool bar here, and I can take, a checkbox, and it puts it onto the form. I can do a, let's see, a command button. There it is. I can move that and resize that around. They had list boxes. There's a list box right there. Let's put that over here, and I drag this corner, make it a little larger, the list box. And I'm going to do a text box too. And there's a text box. These seem very familiar to us today as visual programmers, and almost every paradigm uses this, but for DOS, just try to imagine what this was like. And then, so this is what really kind of blew my mind at the time. I can take this command button here, and let's see, save it, yeah. All right, I want to do the command one click function. As you can see, this is pretty amazing. All right, so then it gives me a little code here. I actually wrote this so I can make sure I get the syntax right, because the syntax was a little funky. It wasn't exactly the same as Visual Basic we know in Windows, but it was very similar. So I had this list one control. There's an add item method, and I'm going to take the text one.text value. All right, and then just like that, I can run this, and I get it, and it doesn't do anything. All right, hang on, what did I do wrong? Got the command. All right, I gotta go back to the form and get that first. I need to run it from the form. Nope. Oh wait, I need to, let's do the window. No, view, that's it. View the code. Exit the program environment, yes. Let's see. Edit and active. This is going to be pretty cool, but now I seem to like not be doing very well at this. I'll give it one more second, then I might have to abandon this if this doesn't work. Just like Tom Cherry Holmes, it worked great when I was messing around with this and getting ready and doing this in the demo. Run or restart it. And I can't get it to work. All right, well, for sake of time, I'm going to have to give up. But trust me, it actually would generate a DOS exe, and maybe I lost my code. That's where it is. I lost the form for that form. One last shot, then I'm going to give up. Nope, all right. So I've messed up something I'm not finding here. But it would actually generate DOS exes, and it would be like programming for real in what you would expect Visual Basic to be. All right, sorry about that. I don't know why I don't have time to fix that. All right, let's keep going. Anyway, that was me. I worked as a senior. I started working for a company called ISC. It was an intertribal software consultant because there was a big Indian bingo hall outside of Durant, Oklahoma. And we were building Windows applications because the person who started ISC was a big fan of this proto-gen concept. And so this was all very exciting because although I loved doing DOS applications, suddenly Windows was the up-and-coming thing. Windows was supposed to be the cool thing. And Windows was really hard to do at the time as well because you had to do a bunch of resources and things like that. But this proto-gen, I want to show you real quick, kind of changed some of that. All right, let's get in here. And it's kind of funny because another reason why I didn't like doing Windows applications, it used to take so long to load Windows. What I'm about to show you now, I tried to do some things to make this emulator slow and actually make this happen, but it used to take 5 minutes to load Windows, but on this emulator, unfortunately, it loads way too quick. All right, let's scale that out. So I want to show you real quick what the big deal here was with proto-gen. Proto-gen came with a view painter, and the view painter, here it is right here. Look very similar. Like I say, you're not going to be surprised at what this does now, but at the time, once again, this was pretty amazing. So I'd take a checkbox here, I'd paint it out on the form, and I want a command button, and it didn't give you any standards, so you could make command buttons that were ridiculously insane and things like that, and edit control and stuff like that. So it gave you this kind of cool view painter, but the real power happens to be here. When I want to go and now generate, and you could choose what language you wanted to target. So it knew how to generate to Microsoft or Borland C, or it could also generate to Pascal. So we started using this as a way that would help us with the UI development because we didn't have to go and worry about the resources, and it would generate all the resources and the positioning and all that stuff for us. So proto-gen became kind of our go-to at that period in time. But those bad habits that I'm kind of talking about as far as the way I could paint and make anything created problems because this is the sort of the stuff we were making at the time. These big buttons, strange looking things, modals, weird fonts and colors. We didn't have any standards, and there really wasn't a lot to go on in the industry that kind of would guide you. So we built things like this as well. I don't know why those icons. I'm not sure why canceling a reservation is a radioactive fire. But somehow that icon made sense to me at the time. So anyway, when I left university, 4 years later, the lab had completely changed. This was a big swing at the time, going from a huge, if you remember, it was an entire room of terminals. And they moved the VAXs downstairs, got rid of half of them. There was one little table that had a few 320s on it still. There was a freshman class, I think that was still using Fortran or something on them. And then there was all these tables that had been replaced by these non-networked PCs running DOS and Windows. So there was a big shift in that 4 years while I was at school. All right, let's see. Let's move forward to 94 to 98. Wow, the Clinton, Lewinsky scandal, Princess Di. Netscape Navigator was starting to be a big thing here towards the end of that period. I remember watching the Mars Pathfinder rover on TV. That was, these were things going on in the world. Things are starting to shrink as far as the competitive operating system landscape goes, right? There's a Mac OS System 8 there in 97. the bifurcated code bases of NT versus the regular Windows. Windows 95, right? They paid $3 million for the Start Me Up song or something like that, right? That was a big deal. OS 2 made one last gasp trying to get OS 2 Warp out the door, and that was sort of like the last OS 2 version. I was working at Grand Casinos, yes, as a software engineer there. This was kind of a cool thing because this company was trying to do things as opening a lot of casinos and doing it on PCs. At the time, AS400s were kind of the standard for operating systems inside casinos and for slot machines and table games and things like that. So after doing Windows, I was so excited, and then I go back to going DOS again. So this is a program that I wrote for tracking markers and marker redemptions. That's the credit memos, essentially, at the casino. DOS. This is the hotel reservation system that we used. DOS. And why was it DOS? After Windows was starting to make such a change, right? Well, there's two reasons. NetWare. We're running NetWare everywhere, and we were using the network boot protocol. So we had all of these PCs that were everywhere in the casino had no hard drives. This network boot protocol was this magic thing where NetWare would allow you to turn on the machine, it would reach out to the network server, and the network server would give it a virtual disk. Which was cool for DOS, I guess. It worked, and we got a lot of things done, but obviously that was problematic because Windows uses lots of virtual memory where it wants to swap to the hard drive. And you could not do that very effectively over a very slow, at the time, wired connection. So that was one reason why we were still doing DOS. The other reason was furniture. Furniture, because the furniture was all built for terminals, and there was no room for a mouse. The pits, that black cart in the middle there, was where a computer terminal was to print out markers, and the furniture was designed, there was no place to put a mouse. All the stuff at the cage and at the hotel, the furniture was designed to have a terminal and a keyboard, no room for a mouse. And this was one of the first battles we started to have challenges with. Both of those things started to change. They started to put hard drives in the computers. They started to design furniture so you could put a mouse, and we started making some progress there. But we were still using Protogen at the time, so things like this were still happening. One thing I do want to point out is that the only thing we were influenced by, this doesn't look much like a Windows application. It's mostly like a DOS application. I think we were still thinking in terms of DOS. We were still thinking about user interfaces as how you would interact with them in DOS. So that's what we were building. Then, of course, Borland Delphi, or Delphi, depending on where you're from, came out, and that started to change things. We started to have a little more standards started to leak into the world. We started getting better about thinking about in terms of Windows and what things should look like. But it wasn't easy because I actually had to write. I remember doing this in '95. We had to write a style guide to say, all right, here's what our software needs to look like. Here's the, as far as standards for sizes and colors and things like that. And that started to help. So some of the things that we wrote later started to look a little more like Windows applications. The sizes of controls made a little more sense. Some groupings made sense. We started to use controls like the tab controls and combo boxes and things like that that started looking a little more like Windows applications. And that kind of led up to one of the big projects we did was opening the Stratosphere Casino. And wow, I could talk for a whole hour probably on that whole Vegas World thing, Bob Stupak and the Vegas World casino packages. That was a whole project. It was a nightmare, ended up in court cases. But anyway, we were getting pretty good at that point. Our software was actually looking like real Windows applications. And it was recognizable by users, and we're trying to use the UI in a way that made sense and made you feel like you understood how to use these things because it looked a lot like other commercial software packages. And then, of course, we started doing things in HTML, and this is what the web looked like in '97, right? People were, wow, I could use colors, and I have freedom. I can do anything I want to, and no one understands anything about how to navigate a web page because it's all ugly then, right? All right, let's jump forward. We got to '99 to 2003. The guy in the middle there is the Bush versus Gore, the hanging chads in Florida. If you don't recognize that photograph, that was a huge thing at the time, that election. Kmart filing for bankruptcy was huge. And then, of course, the 9/11 there. That happened in 2001. So I had left Grand Casinos at that time. Oh, wait, I keep on forgetting about this slide. Anyway, OS X, that was a big leaping forward for Macintosh, and then of course Win2K and Windows XP, which then started to rule all PC Intel PC operating systems for a long time. Windows XP. All right. Oh yeah, I forgot about this. The browser war. Do you remember that one? Were you there for the browser war 1? War 2 was later, but War 1 was here when Netscape got trounced by Internet Explorer. Right. All right, what was I doing? I left Grand Casinos and I did Y2K remediation for a while. That was fun. But I also started working for a series of independent consulting companies that kept on being purchased by other independent consulting companies, being purchased by other independent consulting companies. I think I went through like 4 or 5 acquisitions in a short period. And we just start actually, I learned ASP, I learned Cold Fusion, and I got a little better at, making the leap there from Windows to web. So these are some of the things that I was doing at that little period of time there. Looks a lot like DOS applications, doesn't it? I put some color on the page, but it's still DOS. I'm still thinking in terms of DOS. I haven't made the leap yet. But as I got a little further into that, it got worse. So I want to show you a little bit about a reservation system. Apparently I made this for a little less than $5,000. I actually found the invoice. So like $5,000 I charged to build this, and look how terrible that is. I actually want to show it to you because I was actually able to get it stood up. And let's see, this should work. Yeah, so there's the login screen. I actually stole that from Yahoo. That used to be the Yahoo login screen format code about that time. And yeah, look at that. This is very common, I think, about this time frame of web systems where you had a lot of Photoshop where you pull things together and make these buttons that are images that don't know how to scale very well. Yeah, let's do a day tour here. And yeah, more of these weird tabs. It's not quite DOS-ish, but it's not quite web-ish either. It's like this terrible time in between where we were doing things like this. And I do want to quickly show you something kind of interesting in the system setup. So if I go to, I'm sorry, bus company's database. If I create a new bus company. So you'd expect there would be some validation logic for what fields are required. So if I hit update here, I must enter a valid liability amount. That's what that says. So valid liability amount. All right, that's here at the end. All right, that makes sense maybe. That means that I was just checking the page from bottom to top, right? So if I try to update again, it says must enter a valid flat rate amount. Wait, flat rate amount. Wait, that's way up here. Why did I validate that there? I don't know. Do it again. Yeah, policy expiration date. So I don't know what was thinking about why my validation was jumping all over the page. But yeah, that was also pretty typical. I don't think people were thinking about how to navigate with a keyboard. We had a mouse. You didn't need to use a keyboard and worry about tab orders and things like that. So yeah, this was a pretty awful web application, but it was pretty typical, I think, at the time for what the early web was. All right, but the web got better. In the same way, there were standards. Bootstrap, CSS3 came out, kind of that whole transition from what they were called Web 1 to Web 2. Things got cleaner. People started expecting things to look a certain way. People weren't happy with applications that had oddball colors and weird formats and styles and commands all over the place. Started looking a lot more like what we are used to today. You can almost visit every website and you can almost tell what template it was based upon and how it was put together, right? All right, so let's wrap up. Because we live in the future now, right? It's 2024. I'm talking about stuff that started back in the 80s. So what did we learn here? Well, we came from a time where you had to have commands that were long text-based things, and we started building interfaces that allowed you to interact and choose things that were a little more simple, but a bit confusing because every program did things differently. Then we got into the text UIs, the TUIs, right? That's Visual Basic for DOS, which then turned into Visual Basic or Borderland Delphi for Windows or other things that were, Visual Basic for Windows or the .NET stuff that eventually came out. But I think we were still thinking in terms of DOS. We were still making forms that looked like they were from DOS. They didn't use Windows controls to their extent for a long time. But then we got better, and we started making things that looked like Windows applications. Then the web came, and we made things that looked like Windows applications and DOS applications on the web. You can start seeing that we have this problem that we keep on doing. So yeah, things look like this, these Windows forms and things like that. And then we started getting crazy, using color and weird things that no one understood. But then we realized that that was hard for users, and we needed to make things easy. And so standardization started to take place. And now, where are we at now? I think we're entering this whole other realm of how you interact with applications, this whole other realm of how you interact with data, right? ChatGPT. And so my plea to all of us as a community is like, as I've just shown you, you're going to start using ChatGPT, but you're going to try to use what you do today and put ChatGPT into it. Please don't do that. Please think about that, the lessons that I've just showed you, that every time you're going to transition to a new paradigm, that you're going to be thinking in terms of the old one. Try to stop that. Try to jump forward and think about this is a different way of interacting with things. Use the things that are appropriate for that environment. And timing-wise, I think I did pretty decent. So that's where I'm at. Thank you for listening, everybody.
You do have a couple of minutes if anyone's got any questions.
Thank you. Do you have an idea of what the future of UI will look like? That's kind of a trick question because I already know what it's going to look like.
We've been a couple of different things. One is that at iSIMS, we've been doing two different things. One's copilots, and I think the copilots are the idea of like the old paradigm. I feel like we're trying to say, here's this old style web application, and let me like jam in something where you can ask questions and do something. But there's some more exciting stuff we're doing, which is let's not even go there. Let's just go there, and I'm a recruiter, and it knows how to, we're building in a lexicon of things like I want to open a job rec, I want to post a job, I want to do this. So it's like you can interact with your application, and we have all the functions that are almost scripted based upon these commands, so that instead of having to like click here, click here, click here, type this thing, do it, give it one command.
You actually just did it right there in front of yourself.
Yeah, I think it's where it's going.
The way I see the future GI or GUIs or UIs actually was when I saw the TV series The Expanse.
Oh, yeah.
Where they manipulate in 3D space, which makes absolute sense for how we would interact with data and technology, hopefully in the not too distant future.
I like the idea, but yeah, that still seems a little bit sci-fi to me.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, I like the idea of like having not be constrained by a boundary there.
Yeah, and you actually had it in your last slide too, because you had the image there right there.
Yeah.
So that kind of, I think, is where we're heading eventually.
Yep. I agree.
I don't know if it even ever got as far as OS2 Warp, but did you see a product that was around in early 90s maybe called Desk View? It was like a windowing system for text mode programs.
There were a bunch that were about that time, and they were kind of on my poll that didn't make it through, because I remember there was like Gem, Top View, Deskmate. There were a bunch of different competitors about the same time, and I say there's a YouTube video, a guy did a whole hour on this period where I think is Barbarians led by Bill Gates, and how he sort of through vaporware and maybe some questionable business practices crushed all the competition that was out there for graphical interfaces. I remember working with Deskmate, and I remember briefly interacting with somebody that had Gem, but I don't remember TopView exactly. But yeah, there was a bunch of them out there that there was potential, and they all got crushed by Bill Gates.
Time for one more quick one, if...
So you kind of leave us with a cliffhanger on the last slide there. Most of my work is embedded, so I never really even got to the GUI era of computing. But I was wondering what you think a useful or practical application could look like that does use AI rather than whatever the current web standard is. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think about it in terms of functionality, and I think this is what we're trying to apply at iSIMS. Is right now, a lot of applications represent ways that you can manipulate your data, ways that you can interact or transact with your data. And you have to do that through controls and through views and things like that. And we're trying to think about, all right, what are we trying to accomplish, and how can we leverage AI to do that? Like I say, one of the examples is a project that I'm actually working on right now, which is I want to, when I come to a job and I want to see what should I do next. Right now, the current version of iSIMS, it just gives you a bunch of like commands and lists and some list of data and some tables and things like that. But we're using AI to try to pick out, all right, you have a candidate that has an offer extended and they haven't accepted. You need to follow up with them. You have 15 candidates that are past the initial screening and need to have interviews set up. What do you do about that? So we're trying to make things that will surface the actions that I as a human need to do, and make them very simple, like one click, one command things that will do these compound interactions. If I need to the scheduling interview thing, one click, I say all these 15 candidates, yes, they all look great, schedule interviews for them all. And it will then send out a self-scheduling email to them all and coordinate with the hiring manager schedules and do all that. So the recruiter right now has to do all that. That's hours of work for a recruiter to manually send out emails and match up calendars and things like that. So we're really trying to do things that allow more actions with less human work, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's the future. That's the future as we're trying to see it right now.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right.
Thank you very much, Byron.